if there. Oh, Steve Hotze is with us.
There we are.
Hi, Steve.
Hello, Al. How are you
Welcome,
doing, sir?
welcome to the show. Steve Hotze
Glad
has
to be
joined
back.
us. He is a medical doctor, also somebody who's been very actively involved in our politics. Since you were young, Steve, we actually met each other years ago. I won't say how many, but I was, 17, something like that, I think, 16 or
Right.
17.
Boys State in Texas. You ran for governor and lost, but you went on to run for president of Boys Nation, and you won.
Well,
I wish
look at that.
you president of the United States.
Well, you put on a wonderful youth rally at that time, which I still remember certain things that I remember thinking through because of that occasion that have stuck with me all my life. And I've really enjoyed the fact that you have not only stayed active, but you're actively involved now in some things that could prove very critical to the outcome of an election that is super critical to the future of our nation. One of the things I wanted to do is talk a little bit about what's happening on that front in Texas. But we were in the midst of a discussion that has been running through the first two segments. The show has a little bit of a different format because even though it's formally the same, I'm conducting a 4-hour marathon every day, bringing in guests, talking to people about things, because I think that what we're faced with is so important that it needs to preoccupy our attention now. As we get closer to the election, more and more people must be awakened to the fact that this is not just another election. The Democrats have forced us into a position where we're actually choosing between people who have shown a disposition as a party now to be anti-American and to stand against fundamental premises that make our way of life possible, without which it will not be sustained, but will be turned into some kind of totalitarian dictatorship of the party elitists, which is why I guess this whole mess started focusing on China. And the other day, somebody took a global poll, they claim. And guess what's the happiest country on earth? Communist China.
Really?
Which of you believes this? I don't believe this for a second, but that's what the propaganda mill wants us to believe. So, and we were just talking about a point, Steve, that I know is very much often on your mind, because we were dealing with Amy Coney Barrett's nomination. I got into the subject of whether or not those hearings are even usually handled, even when the Democrats aren't just being rabid ideologues, whether they're handled with a proper respect for the fact that when somebody goes on the Supreme Court, you not only have to test their understanding of the words, you have to test their understanding of the premises and intentions of the words and what they were intended to achieve, why they are present in the Constitution, what was the aim that the founders intended to achieve. And I think that it's a critical component of all of this that just goes begging. We're joined today by a guest who has been on, and this is how it will be happening on the program, Roger Angus. And Roger is, from my perspective, somebody who not only represents a deep an activist involvement in our politics, but he's involved on a basis of a combination of faith and common sense. And you can stop up your ears while I sing your praises, Roger. That is exactly the combination that the founders relied on as essential to the American character. Because I think that combination is what, in point of fact, has allowed us to deal with just about everything and come out on the right side of it in the course of a history that had a lot of complex challenges and no guarantee that we would. So I'm happy to have both of you on today. And as we were talking about the Amy Coney Barrett thing, how is that going over in Texas? I imagine very well.
Well, we've got a big problem in Texas, and it starts in Harris County, where Houston is located, where we had the youth rally years ago, back in 1967, Alan. That dates us. But guess what? You stood strong all these years. Our compatriot, Rick Scarborough, has stood strong and is still an outstanding leader in the Christian evangelical political movement. And I've stayed strong because I've watched you and what you've done. You've been an example to me for decades, Alan, and I commend you and I thank God for your friendship. Harris County is a big problem. You know why? We have uncovered massive election fraud in Harris County, and it has to do with ballots by mail, which say, well, there's no evidence that ballots by mail are causing any problems. That is the most outrageous, outlandish lie imaginable. Ballots by mail can be harvested at nursing homes, in the homeless areas, from poor people, from dead people in Harris County, the dead vote. We haven't cleaned up the voter files since the Democrats took over in 2016. We've got loads of people that have moved out of the country, or out of the state, out of the county, who are still registered in Harris County and who still vote or voted for. We have plenty of people that have passed away in Harris County, but Daddy was a good Democrat and we're going to let him vote again. He gets a ballot mail every year. So here's how they do it in the nursing homes. They have their contacts. We know this because we have right now 20 investigators with whom we're working in the field, uncovering all this information from informants who are part of the criminal vote harvesting ring. I say criminal because harvesting votes in Texas is a felony. You can get jail time for that. This is how it works, we've discovered. They go to their contact at the nursing home, they pay a fee to that contact. They give them a little money. He gives them, or she gives them, a list of all the residents of the nursing home. They apply for ballots by mail. When the ballots by mail come in, they get a phone call from their contact and they get the ballots and they go vote those ballots. They're doing this all over Harris County. They're also going to the homeless centers and they're paying the people, we know this, $75 to get on the bus and go vote. And they're doing it knocking on in poor neighborhoods. They know when the ballots by mail have been requested or being sent out, and they're knocking on the door saying, we're ready, we'll help you with your ballot. And then they carry all the ballots in. That's called vote harvesting. That's illegal. So unfortunately, our Republican governor thought he had the wisdom to make things good. He's worried about the coronavirus, he says. And so he expanded early voting by an additional week, which we said, give the Democrats another week to vote and to steal the election. That's what they're doing, another week to steal ballots by mail. I filed a suit against the county clerk with the Texas Supreme Court, a petition for writ of mandamus, and they stopped him from sending them out to every voter in the county. He had them already printed, and they're in his clerk's office today. He may send them out anyway. There's no penalty if he does. He did send them out to 65 and older, but sending out ballots by mail, as they're doing not only in Harris County and in Texas, but across the country, and many of them aren't even applied for. Everybody that's registered gets a ballot. That is a recipe. That's an environment. That's an opportunity for the Democrats to commit massive voter fraud. And we know what's happening in Harris County. We know the groups that are doing it, and we know the Harvard. No, listen, worse than that, our Harris County Court, which is controlled by the Democrats 3-2, allocated $27 million for the election in Harris County. With a court controlled by the Republicans in 2016, they only allocated $4 million. Why $27 million? It wasn't just for printing up ballots by mail to the people that requested them, which by the Texas law you have to request before you can be sent a ballot. So they're not sent out. Ballot by mails aren't sent out, but applications are being sent out against the Texas code. But anyway, what happens is they send out the ballots by mail, and then those ballots are harvested by a group called AB Harvesting Company. And they're being paid by the county commissioner's court with the $27 million is for voter participation. It's a Democrat court. Who do you think the Democrats are promoting I've gotten, I don't know how many text messages on my phone. I got text message on my phone telling me to be sure to Ernestine, they call me. I don't know how I got the Ernestine. I signed up and got on some Democrat list because I wanted to see what they're doing. And I've been, per Ernestine, who I didn't even sign up to be. Ernestine has a credit problem, and some way she gave her number. I get called her credit problems for the last. But I'm on the Democrat list, and the Democrats call me up, and I want to read to you what they told me. This is nothing short of remarkable. When you hear this, let me see if I got it right. Here we go. Here we go. Come on, I don't want to leave you guys hanging here. Anyway, the whole deal was, Ernestine, guess what? We're having a big van party. Everybody's coming out. And what we're going to do is we're going to meet at the park, and we're going to feed you lunch. And then we're going to take you to the polls. Are you coming? Ernestine, are you coming? We got a free lunch, and we got a bunch of other stuff for you, bands and everything. So the Democrat, I'm getting this on my text. I have people in my office who are Republicans. They're getting texted by the Democrats. Come on out. We got everything for you. So they're buying votes by giving people free lunches, by giving them $75 if they're homeless, stealing the votes from the nursing homes. And this is a criminal operation. It violates not only the it not only violates the Texas election code, but it violates the Racketeering Act, RICO. It's a criminal operation. So our goal is to expose, stop, and then get these individuals that are perpetrating it charged, and they're high-level individuals, state senators, county commissioners, mayor. All these people are involved in this vote scheme. And guess what? The harvester of the votes, that there's the Dons, that would be our county commissioner, Rodney Ellis. He's got Dallas Jones under him. He's a big harvester in Harris County. He's been hired by the Biden campaign as their political director in Texas to spread this voter fraud throughout every metropolitan area.
Well, I'd be kind of curious, Roger, whether you are seeing signs and folks are concerned about signs of shenanigans like this in Colorado.
That we are. Colorado's been labeled the gold standard for mail-in ballots. We've had mail-in ballots for, I think, 8 years now. But I just read the other day, we have 64 counties in the state of Colorado. 40 of them have over 40% or over 100% voter registrations. 40 of the 64 counties. In 2018, we had 10 counties that actually had over 100% voters in the 2018 election, with one county being 140%. Now, the Republicans took all of this to the court and demanded that this be, looked into. We need to verify, especially the county, any county that produces 100%, there's something wrong there, because that never happens. It just never happens. So when you get 140% turnout, you take it to the court and say, we need to verify these. And the court says, no, we don't. And they allowed every single solitary vote. So it's happening again. In 2018, we had 10 counties. Now we have 40 counties. So I do believe that we're going to see massive amounts of voter fraud, just like Steve is seeing in Harris County, Texas.
Well, see,
this is the operating mechanism of the Democratic Party. They can't win the election. Trust election day, Trump is going to win because 65% of Republicans have said in polling that they're going to vote in person. Only 6% of Democrats are going to vote in person. The polls across the country and the election centrals are all, which are run, by the way, not by the county and states. They're run by 6 privately owned election companies that contract with states and counties to run the elections. That brings in the whole concept of computer election fraud, which has been documented in Dallas County by our cyber experts. And our standards here in Texas aren't met by our computer companies. We're getting ready to file another petition for writ of mandamus with the Texas Supreme Court requiring that all these privately owned computer election companies would submit audit logs of everything that's put in and taken out of the computer. In Dallas, they would thumb drive, print out the precinct, erase it, and put in another thumb drive, and the votes would change.
Well, isn't most of the electronic ballot machines owned by a company that's funded by George Soros?
Well, the six companies in the states, one of which is ESS, you've got Hart, you have Dominion, and three others, including Silent, all feed up to Clarity, which is owned by Seclarity, is another election computer company that gives all the results to the news media. And then they're owned by Seidel in Barcelona. The head of Seidel is one of George Soros's close friends. He's a Lord Brown out of the UK, and he's on one of his investment companies. He's the chairman of one of Soros's investment companies. By the way, these other companies also have interest owned in them by Google and Facebook and other leftist social media organizations. So do I have any confidence that this election is going to be fair, conducted fairly? No, it's not. They're going to do everything they can to steal the election. Our only hope is that God in some way will confuse them and trouble them, that they could not carry out their plan, and that God-fearing, patriotic Americans would turn out in such massive numbers that it couldn't be overcome, even if they try to steal it.
Well, I would want to raise a point that might seem a little bit out of left field, but I don't think it is, because we were just talking a few minutes ago about the issue of character, right? Character in terms of people who are elected, and whether voters anymore consider that as an important factor in their vote. And as you were talking, and as we're thinking about this election challenge, I find myself sitting here thinking, but if you have started to lift up people in your politics without regard to character, like character foibles like cheating on your wife and stuff, right? Which, that's private life. We shouldn't pay any attention to that. Well, you and I both know that many people who engage in such things, it's not only an indication of how you're relating to your wife, it often becomes an indication of how you relate to the truth. And whether or not you start to get fairly easygoing about fabricating things that will keep folks from knowing what you're actually doing because you don't want them to know what you're actually doing. So you tell different lies to different people, and you have to keep them all in check. And little by little, your character in that regard, observing with any scrupulosity the difference between telling the truth and telling lies, disappears. You start to take a more strategic view of things. If character in other respects, how you handle your business is not enforced, little by little you grow into a person who might be very effective at getting your way, ingratiating yourself, hiding things you don't want people to know, letting them know what you want them to know. Little by little you become somebody who's going to be a great scam artist, a great crook, all under the guise of a politician. But you're developing the skills to deceive and to otherwise take advantage of people. Isn't this why the founders sort of put an emphasis on character? Because they used to read the Bible and kind of get the idea that if you're not walking the walk over there, then you're learning how to walk that other walk. And when we're trusting you to take care of the funds, to take care of the elections, to take care of the integrity, you're going to be pulling the same scheme on us. It'll just be more elaborate. And the Democrat Party today is a party that utterly discounts all moral factors at the individual level. Isn't that true? So what else could we expect from them than rampant efforts to cheat? Because the only thing that seems to matter in their sort of world is the outcome. And fine point, I would expect that. If you've ever read any of these sort of socialist, Marxist, Leninist type philosophers, the materialists, they call themselves scientific materialists for a reason. because the only way you get any indication of what's going on is by looking at how the matter behaves, and the only thing that matters is the outcome. And so they're always working for the outcome. Nothing else is there. There's no standard of truth for such people because there is no conscience. There is no God that informs intelligence and allows us to distinguish right from wrong action as appropriate to our species, as appropriate to the handling of our relations with other aspects of our world. It's just not there. The only thing that matters then is that you win by whatever means necessary. Yes?
And that's the Marxist philosophy, that the end justifies the means. You can do whatever. You can plunder, burn, kill, rape, do whatever you want to do as long as you get the end result that you're looking for. So the means justifies the ends in Marxist philosophy, because as you said, they totally discount a sovereign God who intervenes in the affairs of men and women and has a standard of behavior by which we're to conduct ourselves. And if we would follow those standards, it'd be a lot better world. You know, George Washington said, if we lose the Bible, if we lose morals, we can't keep our republic. And what the communists have done, and friends, this is nothing more than the communist Marxist rebellion and revolution that's occurring in America. It's occurred all over the world. Why should we be surprised? Even the John Birchers, who were called a fringe group, have been promising this or warning about this for the last 50 or 60 years, and they're right. You know, it's interesting. My wife said to me the other day, I said, honey, we've got to be prepared for a communist revolution. She said, you've been talking about this all our married life for the last 50 years. I said, it's here. And this is what we're facing right now. That's why those of us that hold to Christian values and biblical values, that hold to our belief in our Constitution as the preeminent law of the land, not an individual, but our Constitution, and that God provides everything His standards do, those of us have to no longer be owls sitting in trees at night waiting for the darkness. We've got to be roosters, cock-a-doodle-doodling every morning and telling, hey, guys, get up and get away. Get out of the stands. Put on a uniform. We've got to take our country back. And this is our chance to do it. And we've got to do it trusting in God that He's going to empower us to do it. Our nation deserves the worst. We deserve judgment. Think about the blood of 60 million babies crying out for God's judgment. You know, it's amazing that He's waited this long to let us see what's going on. And promotion of sodomy and rank immorality on every TV program you want to watch and on the movies, and the kind of language that's used. It's a complete demoralization of the country. Forced sexual communism, demoralization, ruin the morals, ruin the morals. You ruin the morale when you destroy the morals. Second thing, destabilize. Third thing, create a crisis, and then promise if you elect us, we'll normalize. You'll get to vote for the communists one time in your life. After that, you'll never, you know, they say if you can be a communist in a free, you can be a communist in a free country, but you can't be free in a communist country.
That's the great problem, isn't it? And it's in fact the choice we're facing. And we'll be getting into it in this program and all the segments now until we get to the election on Let's Talk America. Because I guess I am more and more worried that if we don't wake up to what's going on, we're not going to have an America to talk about, at least not the one we are aware of. And when I get back, I would like to have a little discussion about the aftermath of an election going this way or that, because we think about the choice we face in the election, but shouldn't that be made at least a little bit in light of the situation that's likely to grow out of that choice after the election? Ponder that. We'll be right back. Second week of November, I was privileged to participate in the Red Pill Conference in Mesquite, Nevada. It was sponsored by G.W. Griffin's group, and it brought together a whole array of activists and conservatives thinking through how we can wake people up to what's really going on in this country. There was a whole series of presentations that addressed political issues, issues of health, and other things that are being done to take away our understanding of what's really being done to transform this country into a totalitarian tyranny. If you understand the danger, then you'll want to be watching these DVDs. We're going to put them together in a series. I'll be introducing the different parts of the series, and they'll all be available at IAMtv.us, the exclusive distributors of this series of views of the Red Pill Conference. Second week of November, I was privileged to participate in the Red Pill Conference in Mesquite, Nevada. It was sponsored by G.W. Griffin's group, and it brought together a whole array of activists and conservatives thinking through how we can wake people up to what's really going on in this country. There was a whole series of presentations that addressed political issues, issues of health, and other things that are being done to take away our understanding of what's really being done to transform this country into a totalitarian tyranny. If you understand the danger, then you'll want to be watching these DVDs. We're going to put them together in a series. I'll be introducing the different parts of the series, and they'll all be available at IAMtv.us, the exclusive distributors of this series of views of the Red Pill Conference. Back. We have been having a fascinating discussion. We started out in this segment focusing on the issue of cheating. And I think we started to take a little turn there at the end, partly my fault, toward the issue of character. But I've got to tell both of you that I think that more often than not, as we're struggling with the present situation in our country, it all boils down to character in the end, because character was the critical ingredient in the beginning. It's part of what I meant when I said that I think you need to be talking to justices about how much they appreciate the frame of mind and the understanding that went into our Constitution and our way of life. And one of the things that was a recurrent theme in letters, in writing, in the Federalist Papers and things like this, was something that the founders called the genius of the American people. And I think when you examine that genius, Tocqueville in Democracy in America pointed, among other things, to two aspects that were critical. One was the Christian religion, and the other was the nature of family life influenced by the Christian religion, right? And you put these two things together, and what you get is individuals of a special character. And that character was suited to self-government, not because you were producing, I guess, everyday angels, but because you were dealing with people who understood and lived in light of the standard of God's authority. And part of what we take for granted now, in the way we talk about ourselves, at least sometimes, but what is increasingly ceasing to be the case, is that we are a self-governing people, right? And a self-governing people meant you weren't being governed by some absolute monarch, some conqueror, some aristocratic class, some bunch of well-heeled oligarchs or whatever, or, by the way, by a priestly caste that played on your superstitions and so forth and so on. I think as we're watching the decline of our character, and this was referred to in an earlier segment of the afternoon here, where we were talking about the COVID crisis and the fact that many of the things that they are demanding that people do don't have a solid scientific basis. They are acting now less like scientists and more like the high priests of some cult, taking advantage of talismans and totems and other objects of reverence or fear to enforce behaviors that are therefore not grounded in any other standard than the will of the enforcers. So at the end of the day, the decline of character affects our self-government directly because we are no longer capable of recognizing and holding ourselves to a high standard, and so we become prey to the absence of any standard when others are dealing with us. And I think that that's exactly what's happened to us. We're basically right now in the midst of a period when we're being more or less misled and duped by people who are manipulating our fears but also manipulating two things that usually are our goodwill, which is our obedience to law and our respect for authority, both now becoming enemies of our liberty because we have given up the standard of authority that transcends human things, which is God. Is that connection valid, do you think, that I'm trying to make there?
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Well, Alan, I would say this: you would make a great preacher. That's just wonderful. The way you framed the whole issue of character and where true character comes from, and how we can discern if we're living a right life or not, is by God's word and his standards. It says in Joshua 1:8, it says, "This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but ye shall meditate upon it day and night to be careful to do according to all that is written in it." Then he says, "And I'll make you prosperous and I'll give you success." So we have a choice in our life, in America and in our personal lives. You want to be successful in life? God says, hey, here's a simple plan. Follow what I tell you. Just follow these things. I gave you 10 commandments. If you can follow those, that's not going to earn your salvation. Christ earned that. But in us is the hope of glory. And through that, we can do our best with his help to keep the commandments, which means we're going to have a moral society and a just and a fair society and an equitable society. This is exactly what the communists promised: fair, equity. Everybody's going to share and share alike. It's going to be a utopia, but it's all built on man's trust in man. And we know that man is we know that we're born in sin and that we have a propensity for that. Even those of us that are redeemed, many of us, myself, have fallen. And what we do, it says a righteous man falls 7 times, he gets back up. So when I fall, I repent and I say, Lord, forgive me for my sins. I don't know what I was thinking, why I did that. It's so contrary to what's good and wholesome and healthy for my person and for my family and my relationship with you. I turn, and I'm going to turn back. And that's what they called upon on July the 26th. On September 26th, there was a national day of repentance and prayer and a national day of fasting. And millions participated, not only in the States, but across the world, begging God to forgive us for our individual sins. And we could enumerate all those, but everybody knows what your sins are. Things we don't talk about, things we hide, Helen. We don't want anybody to know. God knows, but and then we ask for national repentance. We ask God to intervene in our society to cause a great awakening and another revival like we haven't had since 1861 when Charles Finney preached so eloquently against slavery. That was back in 1951 in Chicago. And then, of course, there was Jonathan Edwards in the First Great Awakening, and with a host of other preachers, including the Wesley brothers who came from England. And there was a great revival in America before the war with England. So we need that today. That's the only thing that's going to turn. Long and the short of it is the only thing that'll turn our nation around is if we turn to Christ, turn back to God, and follow his standards. That's what the solution is. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be involved in politics. We need to be, because we need to make sure that those that are elected don't hold to a Marxist worldview that is atheistic, that believes in no morals, that believes in a host of abortion on demand, killing unborn babies after they're born with abortion, promoting of sodomy and all kinds of sexual perversions in our society, polygamy, adultery, fornication, all those things that we know that destroy the morals of the country. And when you destroy the morals, as you said, you destroy a person's character. And we can't have a free society if we don't have people that have godly character.
Well, Roger, at one time, some years back, if you had asked me about Colorado, I would have, because of various things that had happened there. It really got, for a while, to be a state that was attracting folks and organizations that were aiming to help reinforce and remind and rebuild the character of our people. As you look back on the history of your state, what has happened that has now brought us to a point where Colorado seems to be one of those states that's kind of a battleground between darkness and light, as it were?
That's exactly right. Darkness and light. That's the battle.
Well, what we've seen is a massive influx of Democrats, primarily from California. I remember back in, I think it was the late 60s, there was a bumper sticker that said, "Don't Californicate Colorado." But they did it anyhow. And they're coming here not because California sucks, because at that time it really didn't. Hadn't gone through the Ronald Reagan stages yet. But what they've been doing is they've been slowly but surely bringing in the leftist mindset. And they have taken over our state legislature. They've taken over our governor's mansion. We have a homosexual that's in the governor's mansion right now. He's excuse me, trying to keep the state locked down. He's introduced red flag laws. He's just going full bore, and there's nothing the Republicans can do to stop him. They just, whatever they put forth goes through the Senate, goes through the House, who signs it, and then that's it. They put a bill together, and the governor signed it that gives away our electoral college. That whoever wins the popular vote gets our electoral college vote. Well, we managed to get it on the ballot, and for the people to vote whether we wanted that or not. And I was talking to a guy yesterday that he said there are a lot of people he's talking to think that's a good idea to go with the popular vote. Well, the problem with that is there's a political cartoon I saw out this morning that showed a couple in the restaurant, and the waiters there getting ready to take the order, and one of them from Colorado, one of them the person from California, and the person from California put his hand over the mouth of Colorado and said, "I'll order for it." That's exactly what's going to happen. California, Illinois, and New York will determine if we eliminate the electoral college. Will determine the national elections from this now, if that is allowed to happen. One thing that you brought up the election vote bill. One of the things that you noted he was over here in, I believe, 1828, that he was um, very surprised at how much American people integrated their Christian faith in everything they did, everything they did, their personal lives, their business lives, their political lives, everything. He was just astonished, and he actually believed that that was why uh, he had progress so uh, so much in such a short period of time and become such a successful nation is because God was with in everything that we did. I've heard Billy Graham say the other day. I mean, we got to pray the church going right now. We had it going in 2016, we had it in 18. We got it going again now. Billy Graham, uh, Donald Trump would leave office. I believe that 100%.
Well, I think that you've sort of put your finger on something I have thought for many years, but I'm wondering about the other side of that. And if we could talk about it for a few minutes before this segment ends, it would be a useful thing, I think. How do we deal with, I mean, right now we've got a wonderful time, and you mentioned it, Steve, where people are getting together. And I was really pleased to see that theme of repentance, because it is, of course, the necessary first stage to getting help. It's like
Right.
you've got to admit that you have a problem. And then
Right.
God is willing to help you with that problem. But more importantly, you have turned in a direction where you're willing to acknowledge Him and get that help and seek that help. And this nation is in that position. It's why I've always questioned people when they say we're not electing a pastor when you elect a president, because if you really understand the character we must have, then the president becomes the focal point for our common sense of righteousness. And if they don't represent it, as we've had a couple of presidents in recent times that didn't, then I think it both adds to the confusion but credentials behaviors and attitudes that are incompatible with sustaining the way of life. I think we may, though, be headed toward a tipping point, and it's why this election may be so critical. We allowed these folks to get into our schools, take over, and start indoctrinating people in things that were exactly destructive. They're like sappers undermining a wall. They came in to undermine the moral foundation of these oncoming generations, and to a certain extent, with some, they have succeeded. And the question then becomes, in the presence of that, we come to a point where the generations that are passing are going to be handing on things to generations that are upcoming, and the things that constitute those foundations no longer being discussed in the schools, no longer being discussed in the hearings that occur for Supreme Court justices, will disappear. And that vital connection between our character, our faith, our premises of righteousness, and our ability to sustain our constitutional self-government, it'll just disappear. And I think the end result is what we're being pushed toward. Because I'm sitting here watching all these trillions of dollars translated into compensating for lockdowns that kept people home when they were perfectly capable of continuing to be productive. And I say, maybe somebody wants us to get used to that situation. A situation that has been exploited in order to get votes out of cities that are more and more benighted with, because of the kind of government of welfare state cum lax morals and mores and law enforcement and other things that occur to drive those cities to perdition. Are they trying to do this to the whole country? And do we have more than one election left in us before the generation shifts in such a way that will be hurtling toward that end rather than simply moving toward it?
Well, you eloquently stated it, as always, Alan. And let me mention this as a perspective on this whole upcoming election, which you mentioned that we were going to talk about. Historically, in general elections, even all the registered voters, only 50% vote in states that don't have ballot by mail. This has been the historic turnout, 50%. With ballot by mail, it gives an incredible opportunity for those that are dishonest, that those are criminal, to steal the election, which is what the Democrats have planned and are carrying out their scheme to do that, a fraudulent election. So what will happen on Election Day with the vast majority of voters being Republicans on Election Day, by the time you get to the polls on Tuesday night, November the 3rd, I anticipate there will be a big win for Trump. But because of the tens of millions, I heard it was up to 50 million ballots by mail going out. Think of that over the entire population. All those are going to flood back into the voting locations, and it's going to overwhelm the. It will take days and weeks and maybe months. There'll be all kinds of lawsuits filed in the various states by both sides, claiming the election was fraudulent, claiming it was fair, that all the ballots need to be counted by mail, and others saying, no, they're fraudulent. And create an uproar in our country, and that's exactly what the communists want, the anarchists, the Marxists want. They want an uproar in the country, and I anticipate what we'll see is a resurgence, not of COVID, but we're going to see a resurgence of militant Marxist activity in our country, and it's a very realistic that this could lead to an outright civil war. It's unimaginable that I would have said that a year ago. But the way things are going, we have seen a foreshadowing of what they intend to do. And I just read a post by the Antifa group that they're planning on dramatically increasing their anarchist activities if Trump were to be in the lead after the election on Election Day. Now, if the Democrats were happen to steal enough votes and win outright, then what we're going to see is a gradual but steady, maybe a remarkably fast undermining of our constitutional rights. The Democrat Party opposes freedom of worship because they say, oh, people use that to be discriminatory. They hide behind their face so they can discriminate against people. They're going to take away our guns. That's the first thing the communists always do, is get the guns. Then you control the country. And they're going to undermine all our constitutional rights. That's what they will do slowly and surely. So it may not be as fast a program for the Democrats if they win the election, in the sense that we won't see the rioting. If Trump is elected, re-elected, friends, it's going to be ugly.
Well, I think the ugliness will have a relation, though, to the perceived shenanigans that have gone on, which is one of the reasons why I think it's imperative for people to see what's coming and to understand that it is really not Biden versus Trump. I think that may be, too, what is conveyed in the fact that they put up somebody as the presidential candidate who seems to have reached a point where he can no longer sustain effectively, he can no longer uphold the idea that he's ready for that role. I think they've purposely undermined the sense that that's a real candidacy, almost in order to put us in a position where they are targeting Donald Trump, and the hate on Donald Trump is what's supposed to carry them across the finish line. I think we need to notice that. And people need to be waking up and realizing that the outcome is whether the country that we know that still has elections that matter, or can have them, is still going to be here. And if Americans get what I think is the correct idea, that this could be the last free election in the history of our country, and that whether it turns out that way or not is going to be determined by the other surprise that could happen, which is a lot of people who usually don't bother to get out and vote, vote for their country. You need to vote for Donald Trump, but you also need to understand that the race is Democrats versus America, and that if you don't show up, America will perish. I don't think most Americans want that. I think they love the country much more than the Democrats seem to. They love even the difficulties that they must face in their lives to maintain their neighborhoods and to maintain their way of life more than the Democrats think. And I think that a lot of those people need to watch the shenanigans that are going on and determine that if they're trying to overwhelm us before Election Day, people who might ordinarily not participate must wake up and go vote for America on Election Day to see whether or not they can countervail that deadly intention to cheat us forever out of our liberty. Anyway, this is the end of this segment. We'll be right back after these words. Are great when you're a multitasking person. You can listen to them around the house, when you're out in the car, when you take a walk. Now we have put our shows on to podcasts, and you can listen to Let's Talk America on podcasts. You can find them at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor FM, and other apps. While you're there, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on our new episodes. Thanks for listening and supporting us. Together, we're changing the world.
More IAMtv episodes? We are now streaming through Roku. Roku is a device that enables you to stream entertainment to your TV through your internet provider. The starting price is only $29, and you can purchase one either online or through your local electronics retailer. It's easy to use, and you won't have to worry about missing any more IAMtv episodes. IAMtv, changing the world.
Welcome back. Now, we have been talking about various aspects of the crisis we're in, but with a particular emphasis today, for I think good reason, on the crisis of character that is being fueled and exploited by these forces, mostly led by and concentrated in the Democrat Party, who seem intent on, well, the dissolution and demoralization of our country, right? To knock us apart, playing all this identity politics so that we no longer can see the common ground on which we stand. That means we dissolve as a nation, retreat into our particular identities defined by whatever, religion, race, whatever they can come up with to make you think you are being oppressed because somebody else says you don't belong. Right? And meanwhile, of course, they have been conducting a campaign that I wanted to talk about. It sort of came up a little bit before in this series of episodes, but because of the fact that they have been engaging for a while now in our society in ideological shaming, right? You want to make people feel shame. The whole mask thing, they got by the question of scientific validity by trying to shame people into knowing that if you don't wear the mask, that means you don't care about other people. And therefore you must put on the mask to show that you care. Not because it's going to help, but because you're supposed to show that you care. And that sense that there's no connection between the science and the mask then allows them to manipulate our population with this shaming ritual, which is what it is. But there's one shaming ritual that I wanted to ask you all about, and whether or not it really made any sense. And I'm kind of wondering how it's going to affect the election. Because I think this whole business of the institutionalized racism and so forth, it has turned into an exercise in racist white shaming. So that racism is essentially being mobilized to target white people. And the whole silly, and I think in many ways without intellectual foundation, the whole idea that they have been promoting as systemic racism is simply an excuse to say, well, just being white makes you bad enough. And you need, therefore, to be punished. And if your property is taken away, if your home is attacked, even if your life is taken, it's less than you white people deserve, because you deserve to burn in hell forever. I can't imagine that that's going over real well. I mean, not at least amongst people who can see through it to understand what is really happening. Do you think that they have been benefiting from this exercise, or are there folks in this country who have enough decency and a decent respect for themselves and even their children to reject the notion that they should be judged on the basis of their skin color? That's a question.
Well, that's what Martin Luther King was all about. You said it earlier. It's about character. What did he say? I look forward to the day when my people are judged and my children are judged not by the color of their skin, but by their character. So he was a godly man, and that's the point that you make. And what we need to do is we need to be building character in the individuals. When you destroy the morality in society, you destroy the character. And when you destroy the character, a whole host of crimes ensue. And it's justified because guess what? There is no God. We're all here. Eat, drink, and be merry, whatever that takes. If that means taking money from you, I envy you. I'm going to take that money from you. And if I can't get it from you, I'm going to destroy everything you have. It's different than jealousy. Jealousy is I want what you have and I can't have it. Envy is I want what you have and I can't have it. I'm going to destroy it. You know, the Bible teaches us not to covet, not to envy. Those are the commandments. Thou shalt not steal. All these are foundational, fundamental principles by which we're shown to conduct our lives if we want to have a society that's fair and equitable and people are treated with justice. And that's the kind of society we want. Unfortunately, there's two worldviews. You've got the Christian and biblical worldview that believes there's a sovereign God who intervenes in the affairs of man, that has placed down his law and his standards, who's willing to redeem men so that we can have new lives and be renewed. And then there are those that reject God. And the fool says in his heart, there is no God. His deeds are abominable. They're desperately wicked. You can tell a fool, but if he says there's no God, you know he's involved in wickedness. He can't have a God because then he'd be under judgment. If there's no God, I can do whatever I want to do. I'll make my own decisions. Now, what kind of people do you want around you? People that do whatever they want to do, could steal, plunder, burn, covet, do whatever they want to do?
But what?
Or do you want to have people that believe in standards, that are strong moral standards that give dignity to individuals?
Well,
Remember,
see,
we're created in the image of God.
I think, Steve, that
If
part
we're
of the
not.
problem with what the Democrats have been doing, though, is they've been acting as if, step number one, nobody in America acknowledged those standards. And they were just brutal, nasty people. They were enslaving folks. That's why they want to pretend that the country was founded on the day the first slaves arrived, because there was nothing but evil, there was nothing but slavery, there was nothing going on, etc. I juxtapose that with something that is commonplace to come out of the mouths of these leftists, that nobody ever surrendered power voluntarily. You got to take it away. And I think the whole history of the United States ends up proving that to be a lie. And it ends up proving that to be a lie. Why? Did the complexion of the majority change? Did white people cease to be the majority so that slavery was abolished? Did they cease to be the majority so that Jim Crow was removed? Did they cease to be the majority so that equitable access to education and other goods was promoted and money was poured into it and so forth and so on? Is that what happened? Because that's not my memory. While people who were suffering from various forms of problem, including slavery, were there, a majority was formed in various ways, including one that required a serious combat of war, right, and the shedding of blood. And nobody's skin color changed in the interim. The whites fighting for the Union and to get rid of slavery were still whites at the time. The whites who responded to Martin Luther King's call for justice were still whites at the time. And so all of this braying about systemic racism is actually a way to mobilize anti-white racism. And I'm sick of letting them get away with it. When are we going to wake up and realize that this country would be a hellhole of slavery and discrimination if white folks in America, based on their Christian conscience, hadn't decided to change things? It was not a matter of race. It was a matter of faith. And we found enough people to stand together in faith, which is what every crusader for justice in America ever appealed to, till we got to the present sick, violent generation of Antifa and Black Lives Matter. See? And when are we going to stand up and admit it? It's about time, I think, because we would not have the opportunity to go on with this discussion if it hadn't been a majority of white folks in the first place who decided that government should be done on a more equitable basis than it was done in the Europe their ancestors came from, in the Europe they came from if they were immigrants. That decision to erect a standard by which conduct that was still ongoing would be condemned was taken by white folks, and their skin color didn't change before they took it. We are accepting a vicious lie. And I think people of conscience, including other black folks of conscience, are betraying every decent argument ever made to move this nation from slavery to liberty, from segregation to comity, from an effort to keep people down to efforts to lift them up still ongoing. So when are we going to stop letting these people get away with this and forcing us to do something I won't do? I won't lie about other people. I won't lie and sit here and tell you that the white race is so terrible and they kept everybody down. That's why I didn't accomplish anything in my life, because it ain't. People unexpectedly ready to offer the best in them to bring out the best in me were part of it. And there were blacks and whites and Asians and others, but white people were certainly in the majority of those who doing so, because that was the nature of the country. We need to stop these lies, and we need to look at the truth. We have all had to walk our walk in order to bring the country to where it is. And the only people who now want us to turn in racist fashion against the white race in America are people who are themselves the worst kind of power-mongering racists there can be. They want to see the destruction of humankind, except for their own supremacy. And they'll bring it about if we let them keep this up. Excuse the tirade, but I just find it appalling. And I think it's about time. The reason I asked my rhetorical question, because I know some people are bound to sort of hold back and express their resentment in the voting booth, as well they might. But I think we need some folks to start standing up. It's time for an era of truth-telling about Christian white Americans. It's time for an era of truth-telling about the tremendous impact they had in this country and around the world. And I'm sick of listening to the lies. I am sick of watching people bear false witness against my neighbors, many of whom have been good people. And we would see no change in this country and no discussion of change if it hadn't been for their goodness. When are we going to stop it? See? I think it needs to be stopped now. I think it needs to be stopped by an overwhelming vote that wipes the Democrat Party off the map of America's politics. Any vote cast for a Democrat is cast for a perpetuation of this vicious lie. And I won't do it. And I don't think any other person of conscience ought to do it in this country. Anyway, there, I said it.
Okay. Alan, you hit on something that this country is lacking big time, especially with Antifa, Black Lives Matter. I mean, really, think about it. If you got to put a skin color in front of Lives Matter, you got to be one low-life racist. That's all I can say.
Amen.
And there's no personal responsibility with a lot of these people. And that is one of the key things that our founders lived by, is personal responsibility. We've got to be able to take responsibility for our own actions, our own thoughts, things that we do, things that we say. And we don't take personal responsibility for that, you're going to end up with the stats that you have in the black community, where 62% of pregnancies in the black community end up with an abortion. 73% of white persons in the black community are born into a single parent family. And who told us that? Pat Buchanan asked, that white fault? I don't think it's white fault. The Black Caucus in D.C. absolutely demands, abortion at any time, anywhere, for any reason. And they're committing their own genocide, but they're blaming the white guy for it. I'm having a hard time understanding that. I was watching a program the other day, this black lady that was hosting the program had 5 or 6 black men in front of her, and she just went through asked, each male, how many kids do you have? By how many women? And, there's one guy that had 8 kids from 3 different women, another one, 6 kids from 4 different women. But there's one guy in there that had 28 kids from 12 different women. Now, where's personal responsibility there? And all this stuff that's going on is our fault? It's the conservatives' fault? I don't think so. And I've been saying it for years, that the biggest problem that we have in this country today, with our politics, with our morals and lack thereof, and everything, is the pulpit. In America,
Right.
You don't have preachers. You got a bunch of them in Texas, Steve. I'll say that. You do.
Dr. Ed Young.
But you don't have preachers in this country that have got the guts to stand in a pulpit and preach what needs to be preached, what else to preach. In season and out of season. I mean, when everybody is talking, that doesn't make any difference. If it's to be preached, you preach it. We don't want to insult the Democrats, we don't want to insult the Republicans, we want to insult rock people, ties like stock. And we can't do that anymore. This is like when we stop spanking our kids. creatures. That's what we got now. We got a bunch of smart adults. Because they didn't know how to do it. They didn't know how to be corrected. They didn't learn the process from they got what they want to do. And now we get to they start these buildings down and say it's somebody else.
Well, I would have to say, because I'm wondering, Steve, what is going through your mind, because I look at the landscape of American politics, and at the end of the day, folks have allowed themselves to be put in a position where, in order not to appear to be quote-unquote racists, they are allowing deeply racist maneuvers to take place against a portion of the American population that was largely responsible for the opening of doors to greater justice, greater equity, all kinds of greater participation in our society, and who did so both here at the cost of blood and then in battlefields all over the world at the cost of blood, and understood at the time that that's what they were dying for, that's what they were risking for. It wasn't just for ourselves. I've watched as a kind of, understanding of our foreign and military policy has developed that feels that there was something wrong with the fact that we Americans spent so much time in the 20th century fighting battles elsewhere in the world. And I sit here, and in my mind I'm going, well, wait a minute. Would all of you have preferred that we wait and fight all those battles on our own territory? One of the reasons that at the end of World War II we were in such great shape is that that's a war that largely took place elsewhere than on our territory. It was somebody else's fields that were getting blown up, somebody else's cities that were razed, somebody else, and our troops were over there and they were dying in battle. Yes, would you rather that we waited so that they could die while our country was being ruined? Then you're joining forces with the people who seem to believe right now that they should induce change in this country by producing a crisis that destroys our economy and so impoverishes and otherwise immiserates our people. I'm glad that previous generations didn't practice such follies. It is not better that we should fight evil here, destroying ourselves, than over there, helping others. I think so long as we're fighting it, we deserve the praise. And whoever puts that fight together, whoever determines it, whoever decided upon it, they made a good decision for humanity. Unlike the decisions that are now being made, where the WHO has to come out and tell us that because of all these lockdowns imposed upon us by such great people of conscience as the Democrat Party has placed in high office, okay, that now the world is facing a much more devastating pandemic of death than the coronavirus is likely to achieve. How did this make sense? I don't get it. Did this make sense? I don't see it. And I think it's time for white folks. I'll give you one piece of advice. Stop being ashamed because you got nothing that much to be ashamed about. There ain't a country in the world that didn't have slavery, that hasn't had brutality, that hasn't had the exploitation of human being by human being. But there's also not a country in the world that fought harder and did more to end it. And the people who helped us get there and make those decisions all happened while whites were still in the majority. So what is it then that we are slandering them for with this sick intellectualism that makes every single person with a white skin somehow complicit in these evils? Okay? That's no more sensible than to blame every black person for crimes committed and so forth and so on. It's all sick, and we need to get back to who we are. People who recognize that as a sickness, whether the people being taunted and shamed are white folks, black folks, Asian folks, folks from India or Latin America or anywhere in the world. We are a people who understand that God put a kernel of decency in each and every one of us. And the basis of our nation is our common decision to decide to follow that way. And as long as we stand together in that decision, we can stumble and fall and still be forgiven. Anyway, that's my thinking, and I'm going to stick to it.
Alan, I could sit and listen to you all day. I love your intellect. I love your conviction of your spirit and your soul, and it comes through strong, and it invigorates and creates enthusiasm and encouragement in everybody that listens to your godly example. We appreciate it. Now, we talked about this. We talked about character early on, which we get back to character. Character is always
can I interrupt
based
you 1
upon
second?
truth.
We have one break to take here.
Sure.
Which I think I'd better observe. And we'll be right back.
Okay.
Is Stacy still with?
My Stacy is.
Second week of November, I was privileged to participate in the Red Pill Conference in Mesquite, Nevada. It was sponsored by G.W. Griffin's group, and it brought together a whole array of activists and conservatives thinking through how we can wake people up to what's really going on in this country. There was a whole series of presentations that address political issues, issues of health, and other things that are being done to take away our understanding of what's really being done to transform this country into a totalitarian tyranny. If you understand the danger, then you'll want to be watching these DVDs. We're going to put them together in a series. I'll be introducing the different parts of the series, and they'll all be available at IAMtv.us, the exclusive distributors of this series of views of the Red Pill Conference. Welcome back. Well, we have been having, I think, it's been a wide-ranging, but then also a quite focused discussion, because we've been focusing on what I think is the bedrock issue. Now, those of you who have followed a little bit my little interventions, such as they were in our politics, know that for many years now, I hate to think how many, it doesn't seem that long, but it has been a long time. Because when I first stood up, I still remember it, getting myself involved back in '96 in the presidential campaign in a way that aggravated, I am sure, everybody, because it violated all the unspoken rules that people who are nobody don't get to get in there and do that. But I got involved because I was a little concerned. At the time, that everybody was talking big tent and looked like the Republicans were going to back away from their commitment to life. And I just wanted to take the advantage of the process to make the point that that's not right, and that would be very bad for the party and for the country. Ended up giving a talk at that first gathering they used to have usually in New Hampshire. At the beginning of the year, they'd have a big thing, and people who were at that point indicating they were going to be involved in the presidential race got involved. And I was included in that number. And I got up and gave a little 8-minute talk. People say I often give speeches that are very long. I don't know. But that little 8-minute speech may have been one of the best speeches I ever gave in my life. But the aim of it was to make one point, that we don't have money problems, we have moral problems. And that unless we address them, our nation is doomed. That's what I basically said, and it's basically what I still believe. And I think we have come to the crisis of that statement. We have so neglected the issues of character and morals. We have so misunderstood the need to refresh every generation in the basic premises of God-endowed right that our country is founded on, that our hope is slipping away now. And worse than that, there are organized forces that have orchestrated an effort to so demoralize us that we let go, right? That we cease to hold on to the things that make us free. And I think that that's happening. It's a crisis. It's also a crime. But that emphasis on the moral side of things, that's it. And it was reinforced. I've read a lot. I don't count myself a big strategist or anything, but I've read a lot about war and strategy in the course of my career for various reasons. And one of the things always strikes me as almost universally agreed on. At the end of the day, you are more likely to win the war not because of your overwhelming material superiority of whatever kind, but because you are able to maintain your moral purpose, intention, and cohesion longer and better than your foe. And if you have that quality, you can win battles everyone thought to be unwinnable, that then go down in history because the people never forget it. And America won such a battle when we fought the British to begin with. I think the whole human race won such a battle when Americans fought one another over slavery. Are we going to let the prize of that victory go? Because it wasn't a victory for black folks and black slaves and black people oppressed. It was a victory for the whole human race, and we stood by it as a people. Getting into the 20th century, fought wars that weren't on our soil, that we could have survived probably without intervening. That we chose not to live up to our creed, which was stated in terms of humanity's relationship with God, not the difficulties of our relations with one another. When are we going to get back to this? Anyway, we have been devoting our time in the course of this whole afternoon, I guess, pretty much, to analyzing the situation we're in and finally getting to the point of realizing that it's a challenge to our faith and courage that we face. How do you think it's going to turn out, gentlemen? Are we going to be all right? Hard question.
We will only be all right if a dramatic change occurs with the Christian community in there. Our pastor spoke last week, Dr. Ed, the Secretary of the Church, who'd get on fire for the last few weeks. I mean, it makes you sit straight up in the chair every time he talks to you. You know, he's speaking right at you. And last week he said, we're living in the twilight zone. He started off the sermon in the Blackbridge auditorium with thousands of people, and it was just and then he comes on and he says, do you ever like we're living in a twilight zone? It goes back to Rod Sterling. You remember that one?
Oh, yeah. Sure do.
Twilight zone. Well, and you've got to say an American thing. I walk around and go, am I living in a twilight zone? Look at all these people walking around in masks, running in fields all along, and doing whatever the government tells them to do, giving them all sorts of constitutional rights and liberties, which the government has been formed to protect, not to destroy. We don't need the government to protect our health. We need the government to protect our constitutional, God-given, unalienable rights and liberties. And we fight. And what we have to do is Give me liberty or give me death. And that liberty comes from God. It's an inalienable right, and we can't give it away. We're responsible for the liberty we have in Christ and in the Bible that God gives us. And we've got to stand up and fight for it. And that's what our founding fathers and the revolutionary soldiers did in the worst situation. Read the book by Ron Chernow, George Washington. And what these men had to go through to fight the English was unbelievable. No shoes, no food, no money, and yet this small group of just middle class and lower middle class people who believed in liberty stood up against the most powerful force in the world, and with the help of Almighty God, created the United States of America. And I thank God for them. And that's what we have to stand up for. That's what they fought for and died for. As you mentioned so eloquently, all the way through our history, we've had American men and women who have fought in wars to protect freedom and liberty from totalitarian governments. And now we have it on our home front right now. We've got the communists, the anarchists, the Marxists that are wanting to destroy what we had in our American Christian heritage, our constitutional form of government. They want to destroy that, and they want to dictate to you how you're going to live your life. That's what they do in Marxism. And we have got to have the courage to stand up. So Pastor said this. He said, look, are you going to be like, he said, most Christians are putting their head to the ground like an ostrich. Most Christians are like owls who sit in the tree. When do owls go in the trees? At night. They love the darkness. He said, you got to quit being an owl. You got to be a rooster, cock-a-doodle-doo. Get them up in the morning. Get going. You've got, if you're watching, if you're listening to music, everybody loves a violin. Who hadn't listened to a violin with the sorrowful song and had a tear in your eyes? As beautiful as it is, but what we need today is trumpets. Trumpeting that we need to go out and go to war and fight for our values and strength. And finally, think about going to a game. How many of us are sitting in the stands watching other people out there fighting on the field for us? Our pastor said, get your uniform on and get in the field. We've got a battle on our hands. We've got to proclaim the truth of God's word in every area of life. And so here's my call to every Christian out there, every conservative that holds to Christian values. Be a rooster, be a trumpet, be a player on the field. Let's take our country back. We can do it with God's help.
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence there that you kind of captured what maybe events at God's behest have been trying to tell us. Because what was the most startling political surprise for all these people back in 2016? That we put a Trump in office, right? And you could think of it in terms of casino gambling, but I hear that and I think in terms of the sound of a certain trumpet. And the fact that it is needed, because if the trumpet sounds uncertainly, the people will not stand to fight, will not respond to that call to battle. And people are always faulting Donald Trump, but I think one of the main things that his opponents always fault him for is that he's always certain in his pronunciation, and he says what he means to say, and he means what he says. And I think people are starting to realize, or perhaps be reminded, of that quality in themselves, because Americans are supposed to have also that kind of forthright willingness to take a stand, to speak their mind, and to do what is called for in order to defend what is right. But that last part is really critical. And I think, Roger, that it may be part of what we've been losing, that critical sense of the connection between our freedom and our righteousness, if I may use that term. A connection that's made explicitly in the Declaration of Independence, but that is little understood now by too many people who talk as if freedom means doing what you please, when in fact it has always meant, in American terms, doing what God would have you do and what he has communicated to you through his laws or through his Christ. Is that right?
That is correct. We're experiencing it's something, and it goes back to what we discussed in this last segment a little bit, and that's personal responsibility. Part of that personal responsibility is living our lives according to the principles and the precepts of God, which is exactly why the founders laid out the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence in the manner that they did. And they expected each individual to be a responsible human being and a productive human being. And we began getting away from that, not so much in the 1800s or even the early 1900s, but we were on that path in the early 1900s. And by the time we got to the 1960s, it was Katie bar the door. And, whether if it felt good, do it. Whether it was right, wrong, or indifferent, didn't care, because if it felt good, then you could do it. And the people that grew up in that dispensation are the ones that are running the country now. Bill Clinton. I mean, look what that guy did in the White House. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Look what John Kennedy did. Look what Lyndon Johnson did. All of them were massive womenizers, and they didn't care. And the Democrat Party is, we don't care what you do in your private life. Well, the problem is, if you're, excuse my expression, screwing around in your private life, you're going to be screwing around in your public life too, as long as you can get away with it. And we've seen that come to fruition, and now we've got a situation that we've literally the survival of our nation is at risk. Like Reagan said, we're one generation away from losing this thing, and there's no other place on earth to go if this place goes down, if the United States goes down. And we are seeing a mad rush to take this country down. But I'm hoping and I'm praying that we've got people that are praying and that are going to stand up and say, no, this isn't going to happen. I know Steve's on that side of the fence. I'm on that side of the fence. And anybody that comes around and starts telling me that I can't do this and I can't do that, he better have a really good excuse or be able to run real fast, because I'm not going to put up with it at all.
Roger, those are good points. And Alan, I wanted to bring to you a warning that I think we need to consider. And this comes from Isaiah and this is a warning from God, Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20. And many of you have heard this in church or read it. It says, woe to those, woe, W-O-E, woe, bad news, horrible. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who substitute darkness for light and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight. Woe to those who are heroes at drinking wine and hard liquor, and valiant men at mixing strong drink, who justify the wicked for a bribe and take away the rights of the ones who are in the right. And that's where we are right now. And God has said, woe, judgment on those that say good is evil and evil is good. And we see that in our country. And God says, if you continue in this way, woe be you. So that's why we need people like you, Alan. And I congratulate you and Roger that you are willing to speak out on and have the courage of your convictions, your biblical-based convictions. Because men across this country, and I'm talking to men first and foremost, you have a responsibility to protect your family and to protect your children and grandchildren and to protect your workplace and to protect your state and country. You're responsible. If things are bad, it may not be your fault, but if you don't take responsibility, it's never going to change. So you've got to have the courage of your convictions. And when men like Alan Keyes and Roger stand up and stiffen their spines, it causes the rest of us to want to stiffen our spines as well and press the battle to its successful conclusion, trusting God and trusting Him for the gain. And I'll finish with one last thing. There's a great verse in Isaiah chapter 42. It says, God goes forth like a warrior. He arouses his zeal like a man of war. He utters a shout. God raises a war cry. God prevails against his enemies. So if we put our trust in God and we're following him, God's going to give us victory, and that's what we're praying for. And we ask him in Christ's name to give us this victory. Win, lose, or draw, we're going to stand up for him and do the right thing. And we just pray that God would protect our nation and forgive us and turn us back to him.
And you know, I think that that is a wonderful and resonant note to be approaching a close on, because at the end of the day, that reliance on God has been, I believe, the basis for that special kind of courage that from time to time Americans of all different varieties have had to show in circumstances that confronted them. And very often it wasn't just a case of their own survival. It was a case of recognizing at some point that taking care of number one, when you really think it through, requires that you start with God. Since, after all, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. And people take that in various ways, but I think it also means he's one. He's like number one. He's the one you cannot forget, the one you must always remember, the one you truly serve. And when we say out of many one, I think the context in which that made sense and makes sense in our society is when we are bringing that sense of humanity which acknowledges that in us, which reflects in all of us the true being of God. And I think that's what we have come together as a people to do. Not necessarily get it all done here, of course not. But it's interesting that in the Old Testament, God's way of doing it was to choose a people and by their faithfulness to give rise to that which might save other peoples. In the case of the Israelites, that was Jesus Christ. What if, in the case of our world, that is supposed to be the United States, a people of peoples, a nation of nations, chosen by our own goodwill toward God to stand together in his truth, and by that choice signifying our acceptance of the truth that he has in store for us and that humanity could have in store for us. You know, I think that whether they thought it through in those terms completely or not, founders and generations after them of pastors and of people who encouraged the fight against evil and for justice on behalf of races they were not, the black race and Native Americans and Chinese people who came over to work here, all found champions who did not have their same background and did not have their same skin color, but acknowledged that we all stand on the same ground of God's understanding of what we're here to do and what we are here to be, and that it bears one name, and that is the name of humanity. I don't think we're done, y'all. Not by a long shot. I think humanity has a long way to go. And I think if we hang tough in this crisis, we will go on playing our role in that, as we have already. You know, maybe this will just make us more conscious of the fact that that's what we're here for. Well, not to make sure everybody has equal money and equal power and equal this and equal that, but that we all of us can stand together in being equally responsible before God for the good of our nation in the good that our nation chooses to do for all humanity. Every time our statesmen appeal to us in those terms, we have risen to the occasion. we must do so now, or we will surely perish. Ponder that and join us again here at Let's Talk America.